Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. As always, many thanks for tuning in. These videos are becoming a bit of a feature of the channel at the minute, loosely called the morning after the night before. We may go through a weekend reflections title on this one, but you get the picture. Longer, slightly rambling, next day pieces where we talk about what happened the previous day, or in this case, the previous 2 days. The way I work on the way I do these YouTube videos, I try and get an instant reaction video up as soon as the final bell has gone. And then sometimes what that means is you don't get all of the picture because you miss the post-fight interviews, you miss what goes on after the bell. For example, I missed Nazim Hamed's rant last night. I missed the post-fight interviews, and sometimes it's kind of nice to let the thoughts settle in your mind and then have another go. Let me start by saying thank you to everyone who supported the post-fight reaction video that went up last night. I can see a number of people putting it on Facebook, putting it on Twitter, and that makes a big difference. So thank you very much for that. At the time of recording, you know, with some 10 hours after that, it's already got 5,000 views on it. So, you know, massively appreciate that, and hopefully that'll bring a few new people to the channel. One thing that I want to clarify from that initial reaction video is because I got some, you know, this is one of the things that happens when you make videos on YouTube, but I was getting certain comments telling me that I was a Chris Eubank Jr. fanboy, certain comments saying that I was a George Groves fanboy. You know, my honest take on it is I thought George Groves, for large sections of the fight, took Chris Eubank Jr. to school. George Groves was by far the better man. George Groves was by far the better technician. I thought Groves' performance was really strong. I thought Eubank's performance was really disappointing. If they were to rematch tomorrow, next week, next month, I'd pick George Groves to beat Chris Eubank Jr. Let me make that clear. I appreciate we've got some new people to the channel, but if we're talking about my history with these two guys, I've been a George Groves fan for a long time. I grew up in the same area of London as George Groves. I picked him to beat James DeGale, bet on him to beat James DeGale, picked him unsuccessfully to beat Badu Jack. You know, I've been a George Groves fan for a long time. I've actually been one of the people online who's seen as a bit anti-Chris Eubank Jr. in the past. I picked against him when he fought Billy Joe Saunders. You know, and I made a lot of videos that were sceptical of Chris Eubank Jr. You know, both pre and post that Billy Joe Saunders loss. So, yeah, I don't think, you know, some of the people who are coming online accusing me of hating on George Groves, you know, having a rampant fanboy love for Chris Eubank Jr. are accurate. I did get this fight wrong, however. I did think that Chris Eubank Jr. was going to have another level to his game. Unfortunately, he clearly didn't have another level to his game, and I did think that George Groves would be vulnerable to the sort of style that Chris Eubank Jr. brought to the party, and again, I was guilty of underestimating George Groves there. So, yeah, I did get it wrong, and yeah, in hindsight, looking back on it, I can see precisely where I went wrong with the pick. Eubank just hadn't improved from that first Billy Joe Saunders fight. He made the same mistakes, and really the type of opposition, I'm not going to say the level of opposition because he fought some decent opponents, but the type of opposition he fought post Billy Joe Saunders didn't give him the opportunity to work on the areas that had been exposed in that Saunders fight, and didn't really prepare him to step up and face an elite level boxer again. At this stage of his career, 28 years old, he's young enough to come again, but he's also kind of old enough now where you suspect that he may always be vulnerable to that style. Someone who can box him, someone who can move, someone who can use a jab, someone who can keep him at distance, that could well be the kryptonite to a guy like Chris Eubank Jr. And lots of fighters out there now are going to be looking at Chris Eubank Jr. and viewing him as a beatable opponent, and someone that they're more inclined to take on. I think the blueprint for how to cause Eubank problems has now been firmly established and reaffirmed. So, you know, people are going to be fancying their luck against Chris Eubank Jr. For what it's worth, I think Chris Eubank Jr. needs a fundamental change. He needs to change one of the major areas of his game in order to reinvent himself. Could he come back at £160? I've long been sceptical he could make £160 again. So for me, that's probably not the answer. The fact after the fight he began to call out other champions at £168, tells us that maybe 160 wasn't his first thought. One other thing he could do is perhaps sign up with a grade A trainer. Talked in the past about him working with the Mayweathers. Something of that nature perhaps. That could really reinvent himself, and maybe then he could use his lack of a trainer and his lack of respect for his current team as a reason for the below par performances, specifically this one against George Groves. And I actually do think that's a contributing factor. Chris Eubank Sr. in the corner. For me, Groves beat Eubank Jr. in the ring. McGuigan beat Eubank Sr. out of the ring. The tactics were confused. I didn't hear too much of what Senior was saying, but whenever I did, it seemed to be that he was waving Junior on, that he was telling him to go, to close the range. He was telling him to do more and more and more. But it's easy to tell someone to close the range. What you've kind of got to do is tell them how to actually achieve closing that range, because Junior was flying in from long range. He was getting feinted. He was getting caught coming in. He was eating a jab. What I didn't hear from Senior, I heard Senior saying things like close the range, throw more punches, bring more heat, but I wasn't really hearing explanation on how to achieve that against an opponent like George Groves. Whereas McGuigan, clear, concise, and a game plan that really worked. George Groves emerges from this fight with a lot of credit. I actually think it was one of the best Groves performances I've seen. Possibly the best performance from George Groves I've seen since the James DeGale fight, actually, which is many, many years ago. The thing that, impressed me the most with George Groves is how he dealt with Eubank Jr. when Eubank Jr. got up close. And I think he and McGuigan have specifically worked on that in training camp, because Groves, for me, has always been a fighter who's uncomfortable at close distance, and he's always been uncomfortable on the inside for me. Here we saw a Groves who was somewhat elusive on the inside. We saw Groves being able to pivot out of the way. We saw Groves using head movement on the inside. It was really good stuff. He was making Eubank miss. He was able to wheel out and create the distance again. And I think Groves really impressed me in that regard. Obviously, we know he's an excellent long-range boxer. We know he's got a world-class jab, and he showed that again. But that's to be anticipated. How Groves managed to negate a lot of the Eubank game on the inside really is the improvement that I've seen from Groves here. He used the jab and grab techniques at times in the fight, which I know some people don't like. They say it's ugly to watch, but if you're a fighter with Groves' style going up against someone with Eubank's style, you kind of have to look to. You can't look to engage a guy like Chris Eubank Jr. on the inside, and I thought Groves did an effective job of, trying to frustrate and trying to wear him down. Groves, obviously, we know he went to hospital after the fight to have a look at his shoulder. There is some doubt as to his participation in the final of the World Boxing Super Series. And let me say, I hope for George Groves, and I hope for the World Boxing Super Series, that he is able to come back in time for that final. Because one of the problems with tournaments in boxing is that you constantly have injuries. This is the fight game. People get hit in the face for a living. Injuries happen. And it kind of means that sometimes these tournaments are a bit spoiled by injuries. Look at the Super 6, for example, by pullouts. Now, the World Boxing Super Series has been a fantastic tournament. It's added so much to boxing. It's been a really great success for the boxing fans. And if Groves is unable to compete in that final, it really takes a lot of the gloss off that tournament. And that would be really unfortunate, both for George Groves and for the tournament organisers. That would be a real blow to them, and it would be a disappointment in my opinion. I have heard some whispers about Chris Eubank Jr. Stepping up to fight in the final if for any reason Groves was unavailable. I can understand why that would be an option that the parties are considering. given that the money that's involved. I just think it would be hard to take Eubank Jr. seriously as the winner of this tournament now after suffering that defeat to George Groves, because I know Junior is saying he felt like he did enough, but I thought it was a fairly clear victory for George Groves. On my scorecard, I had it either 7-5 or 8-4. I suspect from the comments when I watch it back, I'll probably have it more 8-4 in Groves' favour. But let me say it was a clear 8-4. It wasn't like, a 7-5 that could go either way. It was like it was like 7-5 where you could just about give Junior 5 rounds. Groves clearly the better man. Groves won with a bit in hand. And really the pattern of the fight was, as I say, in the first 8 rounds, I think I scored it 7-1. I think I gave George Groves pretty much everything for the first 2/3 of the fight. Junior came on strong. As Groves became injured in the later parts of the fight, as maybe the gas tank started to empty, Junior was able to go into Eubank Jr. mode a little bit more. But really, when the guys were having their gas tanks full, Junior was no match whatsoever for George Groves, and that was painfully obvious to be seen. So when I say it was 7-5 or 8-4 on the scorecards, do not get that mistaken. This was a disappointing performance from Junior. This was a very, very, very clear win for George Groves. Jürgen Bremer versus Callum Smith next week. Let's see how that goes. Let's see who that goes. I've long been thinking there might be an upset in that one, and long been thinking Jürgen Bremer might have the tools to beat a guy like Callum Smith. So let's see who ends up in the final. Let's hope Groves can make it. Let's hope Bremer versus Smith is a good fight. And the World Boxing Super Series didn't just peak last night. Let's hope there's another twist in that story, I guess. All in all, very, very good win for George Groves. Potentially a win that he'll be remembered for at the end of his career. For Eubank Jr., yes, he can come again. I do feel some of that aura surrounding him, some of that mystique, some of that air of invincibility has completely faded now. And I think it's going to be very, very hard to get that back. There was a lot of hype surrounding Eubank Jr. He isn't the devastating wrecking ball that he's been made out to be. His father was saying there was going to be a chasm in the class between the two guys. There was a chasm, but it wasn't the way that Eubank Sr. was anticipating it to be. Eubank, he's an athlete. He's got a great chin. He's got great heart, great fitness. He's an eye-catching puncher. He puts combinations together well. There's a lot to like about him. He's a personality. But he doesn't have that fundamental boxing pedigree, that technique. He doesn't have that class in terms of boxing that you get from starting in the sport from a young age and having the real amateur pedigree that a guy like George Groves or a guy like James DeGale has. Just my take on it. And even though he can start again with a new trainer, you kind of wonder if it's too late at 28 years of old for him to develop that game. The undercard, let's move on. Let's talk about the undercard. I thought it was a decent undercard. I saw it getting a bit of stick. Maybe it didn't have the sort of celebrity names. You see these matchroom undercards and they have names like Conor Benn or Lawrence Okolie on them, and people are familiar with those names. But I think for the boxing hardcore, probably people who are checking out this video, I thought it was a really good undercard. And frankly, I'd rather see Ryan Walsh versus Isaac Lowe compared to Conor Benn versus a journeyman. That's just my particular preference. Slightly disappointing that Arfin Iqbal versus Simon Vallily was off the card. That was a fight that I definitely wanted to see. I believe Iqbal pulled out with an injury, which was disappointing. Zach Parker was the first fighter on the televised portion of the bill. I've spoken about Zach Parker on this before. I think I had him in my 10 British prospects to follow video 2017. Parker, the more I see him, the more I like him. The more I like him. The British super middleweight scene is absolutely buzzing. I honestly think this guy could be in that discussion of the Groves, the DeGales, the Eubanks, the Callum Smiths in a year. He looks really, really, really good. Very big guy, very, very big at the weight. Good mover, excellent jab, real fast, snappy puncher, very naturally heavy-handed. Made a far easier job than Callum Smith did of Luke Blackledge. Last night looked devastating again. Real. If you guys haven't seen Zach Parker, urge you to check him out. One of the very best prospects in British boxing. There's a lot of prospects like, Conor Benn, who I've already referenced, or Daniel Dubois, who've got a lot of hype around them. This guy, he doesn't have the same hype around him, but he's answered more questions than those guys, and whilst they may go on to bigger and better things, we'll have to wait and see. At the minute, to my humble eye, he looks like the most complete of all of them. Zach Parker could be the very best prospect we actually have in Great Britain right now. Look, still early stage in his career. I think he's had 15 fights. He's won against some decent level of opposition. Some good fights there as he steps into sort of British, Commonwealth, Euro level. But I think he's got what it takes. And this World Boxing Super Series has been good to him, having him fight on the undercards. I understand if Eubanks or Groves had pulled out with an injury, he'd have been there to step into the main event. And clearly they've got some sort of deal with him of that nature. Maybe he'd have even put up a better fight than Chris Eubank Jr. did if he'd been in there. But honestly, really recommend you guys checking him out. I've done videos like in the past where I've said there's a young prospect coming through called Joseph Parker. There's a young prospect coming through called Josh Taylor. Let me say I hold this guy in that level of esteem. Really recommend you guys check him out if you haven't done so already. Tommy Langford versus Jack Kornfield. Another one I got wrong. Tommy Langford. That is the best I've ever seen Langford look by, 2 or 3 times. Langford really looked good in that fight. Put punches together well, high output, good combinations, bit faster, bit snappier. I thought Langford was a weak fighter. I thought Langford was stiff. I thought he was predictable. I thought he was too light punching. I thought he was too lacking in technique. Langford proved me wrong last night. Not a good night on the BG prediction front. I got Lowe was right, thankfully, but 2 out of the 3 went wrong. So hands are held up there. I thought Armfield would have quite an easy time with Langford. I thought Armfield might be able to outbox him, outmaneuver him, outjab him, and it was a very competitive fight. But I think Langford emerged as the definite winner. And again, competitive but clear. Close on the scorecards, yes, but could you make a case that Armfield won that fight? Not really. For me, Langford a definite winner, a career best performance, and based on that level of form, someone you wouldn't mind seeing again in similar fights of this nature at middleweight. Real credit to Tommy Langford there. He's made a bit more of a believer of me than I was before. A frustrating performance from Armfield. I thought Kornfield did some good work. One of the themes of the fight was that Kornfield, who was the bigger man, would land his jab, come forward, back Langford up, and just as Langford was going back to the ropes, and just as Kornfield, the bigger man, was having the visual impression of coming forward, landing punches, Langford would be first. What you needed to see was Kornfield then throw another double jab right cross as Langford was up against the ropes. You wanted to see him ram home his advantage, but instead Langford would be first to the punch and then he'd land a flurry, wheel out, get off the ropes. Very frustrating as a Jack Kornfield fan to watch the fight, and he was beaten by Tommy Langford last night. Kornfield can come again, but this is his 2nd time losing at British title level, I believe, and you start to wonder if his upside is maybe English title level, maybe a British title level against a lesser fighter. But not looking like a guy who's going to go on to European honours or anything like that off the back of last night. Isaac Lowe, Ryan Walsh, good fight. I've always liked Isaac Lowe, always been a fan of him on this channel. Actually, I made a mistake because I said earlier that I picked the Isaac Lowe Ryan Walsh fight right. I didn't at all. I picked Isaac Lowe to win and it was a draw. So actually, you could say I got 3 from 3 wrong. So not a good night's work for BG. I thought Isaac Lowe possibly looked the more convincing of the 2, but I think these are 2 very good fighters at British level. They're both guys, I'm not going to say they're Euro level, but they're both guys at the upper echelons of British level. Let's put it that way. And I thought, I think having seen the fight end in a draw last night, there's a fairly obvious case to make an immediate rematch there. I think it was very competitive, quite gritty, and a good sort of fight at that British title level. You know, Isaac Lowe, you can kind of see he's been he's associated with that Fury camp. Good movement, good boxing skills. Ryan Walsh started to build a presser well, used his experience, and it turned into a very competitive affair. I thought Lowe took an early lead, started to build on that in the middle rounds, and Ryan Walsh was able to close the gap in the later segment of the fight. But for me, I was left with the impression that Isaac Lowe had maybe just done enough, but you can't argue with a draw, and on balance, it was a fair result. So yeah, all in all, I enjoyed the card. A lot of people complaining about issues with ITV box office. Let me say, I did buy the fight on pay-per-view. I bought it via their online service. I think it's called TV Player. I had some frustrations with it, although I understand that I got away with it quite lucky compared to some of the people complaining. So I paid for it. They actually had a deal. It was $16.99 for the fight, or $19.99 for the Groves Eubank fight and the Smith Bramer fight. So like a pay-per-view buying mug that I am, I put in my credit card for 20 quid and bought both of them. At least it means I'll be able to get you guys some content. But yeah, I signed up, was fine. It all seemed to be working fine. At 7 o'clock, when I re-logged in to get it working, very, very slow. Thankfully, it did work for me, but I mean, 4 or 5 minutes of pulling my hair out to get it working, and it was very, very slow indeed. You had to re-log in, took them about a minute to process your login. Looked like the site was maybe very, very busy. Maybe they struggled to deal with the level of people, the numbers of people looking to buy. Which is very disappointing because they should have anticipated huge numbers for a fight of this nature. During the fight, 3 or 4 times where the where it was buffering. I'm not going to say it ruined the night for me because it really didn't, but you know what it's like as a boxing fan when you're dealing with 30 seconds of buffering. It's not good. A lot of people always coming up with solutions for how to watch these fights. For me, I've always been someone who's wanted to buy the fights legally, and I've always been someone who, whenever I've seen streaming done, it's been to a very, very poor standard, and it's not for me how I want to enjoy my boxing. But last night I thought the quality of the broadcast, in terms of what I'm trying to get to, is in terms of the definition, it was poor. Frankly, it was almost as poor as my definition on this YouTube at times. It was buffering. It was a little bit disappointing. Thankfully, by the time the main event was on, it worked fine for me. But certainly during Walsh versus Lowe, there were 2 or 3 times there was like a 30-second window of it buffering, which was disappointing. So clearly that's something they need to work out. Presumably there'll be much less demand for Bramer Callum Smith last week. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. On Friday night, myself and Mrs. Gossip went to York Hall to see the Haymaker Ring Star card. I was very, very pleased to bump into none other than Mr. David Hay himself. Any of you guys who are Facebook friends with me may have noticed a photo of the two of us, which was good. He was a perfect gentleman. York Hall, yeah, so I've got to say, I always enjoy going to York Hall, and when I go not hoping to see a Groves Eubank fight. What you're looking for is not the biggest names in the sport necessarily, but you're looking at that access. For those of you who haven't been before, I strongly recommend it. It's the first time Mrs. Gossip had been to a fight, and I wanted to take her there. She wanted to go, I wanted to take her there because we happened to be in London on Friday night, and I thought it would be cool to be so close to the action and, see it up close and personal rather than going to the O2 to watch it where, you may as well be watching it on the TV, you're so far away. So we did the sort of classic curry on Brick Lane, pint, and then on the way to York Hall. One thing I did notice, and I don't know if maybe this is something that changed a while ago and I just haven't noticed it before. They seem to have changed the seating at York Hall. I don't know if this is something that David Hayes' promotion had changed, or if it's just something that the venue had changed. But when I've been to York Hall before, you've been able to get like unreserved seating just round the ring. Well, they'd kind of changed to like a sort of dinner table setup. So there were lots of big round tables of parties of 10 having dinner there. And, you know, unreserved seating, you were either standing by the sides or you were up on the mezzanine. You know, that's fine for me. We got some nice seats in the balcony and, you know, that worked for us. But there was a huge amount of people who couldn't get a seat at all. And, you know, that sort of, usually when I go to York Hall, like to kind of sit on the ground floor and just try and sit close to the ring, get up close. But, you know, that wasn't really an option on Friday night. So I don't know if that's something York Hall's changed, if that's something that Haymaker, Ring Star changed, if it was a one-off, whatever. But, you know, still, there isn't, you know, I say there isn't a bad seat in the house. There probably isn't a bad seat in the house, but there's clearly better seats than others. So that was just one thing I noticed. The fight card itself, I've got to say, it was probably the worst fight card I've actually seen live. The card actually fell apart a little bit, to be honest, because you know, there was a fight or two that I believe was billed to be on. There was Tamuka Mucha versus John O'Donnell at welterweight. That got cancelled, and then there was Freddie Kiewit versus Tamuka Mucha again that got cancelled. So yeah, it was kind of, the card was a little bit disappointing. A lot of the prospects on display didn't put in great performances. So, you know, I watched Willie Hutchinson. He, for me, was massively overeager against his opponent. You know, really raw, really green, a bit sloppy, you know, really open. And didn't really have too much of a plan B when the plan A of just knocking his opponent out in 10 seconds didn't come into fruition. I know he's only 19. I appreciate he's got quite some amateur pedigree, but he's one David Hay needs to take very, very, very slowly. Yeah, that fight was up at cruiserweight. I think he'd weighed in just over the light heavyweight limit, and I think he'll be a light heavyweight. But there's some killers at light heavyweight. Can't be leaving himself that exposed as he was at York Hall on Friday night. He needs to be taken very, very slowly. From our vantage point, we could see David Hay at ringside with Michael Venom Page, and you know, the expressions on David Hay's face. I'm not sure if that made the TV show or not, but David Hay, for me, looked fuming throughout that Willie Hutchinson fight. You know, there's a few times I saw him with his head in his hands. A few times Hutchinson was taking punches and he was going like, you know, like this. Michael Venom Page, by the way, let me say, if his intention is to fight at middleweight, he is the biggest middleweight I have ever seen. He dwarfs a Chris Eubank Jr. Dwarfs him. I mean, he is huge. I know we talk about weight cuts in MMA, and maybe he's going to have to do that level of weight cut in order to get there. But looking at him, you'd think the guy was a cruiserweight. He's bigger than, I mean, he's bigger than like guys like Frank Buglioni. Certainly, he's absolutely huge for middleweight. He was ringside. Joe Joyce himself, look, he made very, very easy work of an overmatched opponent. What I will say is I was very impressed by Joyce's performance against Ian Lewison. I was really taken with that. With Joyce, I was very sceptical of him after the amateurs. Very sold on him after Lewison. And now I'm somewhere in between. You know, from ringside, he looked painfully slow. You know, looked really, really slow. The opponent was so overmatched, it was easy work for him. But, you know, just seeing his hand speed, seeing the way he moved around the ring, really, really was slow. He's something of a physical presence. You know, he keeps coming forward. He's clearly got a good jab. He's clearly got a good engine. Maybe he's got underrated boxing skills. We'll have to see. But, you know, that speed is going to be a problem as he continues to step up through the levels. Because, you know, I know he's an unpopular figure at the minute in British boxing, but imagine him with someone like Hughie Fury, who moves so well and he jabs, and yeah, for me that kind of style would be a real kryptonite to a guy like Joe Joyce with his speed and his disadvantages in that area of the game. But he'll be one we'll follow with interest. Next fight talks about him fighting Nick Webb, talks about him fighting Derek Chisora. I suspect it will probably end up being Nick Webb, and I suspect he'll have way too much for Nick Webb, but you know, it's a fight that we'd certainly watch and enjoy. Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think what else I can tell you. David A himself, he isn't getting any younger. I'll tell you that when you see him up close and personal, and he looks like a guy who's getting a little bit older actually. And obviously that's not a crazy comment for me to make because we all get older by the day, and because David Hayes now in his second half of his 30s, but yeah, he doesn't look like the same guy he looked a year or two ago. I appreciate he's still coming back from the injury. I saw him on Instagram doing a bit of pad work the other day, and he looked a bit looked like some of the smoothness from his game had gone, but hopefully that's just part of the recovery from injury. I want to see a bit more from him in the lead up to that Tony Bellew rematch. Let's put it that way. Anyway, I've done half an hour already. My throat is killing me. Probably time to wrap this up. Final thoughts. Well done, George Groves. Disappointing from Chris Eubank Jr. They never addressed the fundamental issues in his game highlighted by Billy Joe Saunders. The issues with his game got exposed again. And Groves deserves a lot of respect for being the man to do that. 31 minutes, I'm out. Leave me your comments in the section below. Let me know your thoughts on this content. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so. Please hit the thumbs up to support this video. Thanks for tuning in.